It's a match made in MarineLand. The first time she set eyes on him, she was absolutely smitten.
Smooshie is a walrus who lives at Niagara Falls, MarineLand.
You were a trainer at one time at MarineLand. You're known as the Walrus Whisperer.
The only way to do a story like MarineLand is to have an insider. That was Phil Demers, the first whistleblower.
I was witness to things that people would never imagine.
In response, MarineLand's head veterinarian insisted the animals there are well taken care of.
That was the choice. Walk away, move on, and look the other way, or save Smooshie.
Thanks for all you're doing and for exposing everything. It's so important.
You see the old man here? He's around. For a while, MarineLand's owner sought to intimidate us by driving by our house and stalking us.
John Haller founded MarineLand in 1961.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby.
They sued me for $1.5 million. They sued my girlfriend. They sued other activists. They sued newspapers. They're suing everybody. You don't endure what I've done for as many years as I have with people hiding behind money to try to crush me.
I hate to see somebody ruined over their beliefs.
Just tell these guys, save the headache. Give me the walrus and that's it. If I can get Smooshie's story out, they have to provide for her better care.
Police got a call from MarineLand expressing some concern.
I am the creation that MarineLand hoped to never create. I am their worst nightmare. The picture's revealing itself here, and it's exactly my worst nightmare. A conclusion. Who am I going to be without a fight?
Hello, 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 Cape Cod and beyond. My guest today is international award-winning director and producer Nathalie Bibeau. And today we are discussing her latest documentary, The Walrus and the Whistleblower, about Walrus Whisperer Phil Demers and his journey to expose the abuses at MarineLand, a marine theme park in Niagara Falls. Her work includes Africa on the Move, Sugar-Coated, Canada, A People's History, and Keeping Canada Alive. Welcome, Nathalie. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So I love your documentary. And, you know, I'm just curious what the first seed of inspiration behind the project was.
Well, the origin story of this film is actually an exercise in finding my own voice. I worked in television and in long-form documentary for about 15 years before starting this project, but I was always working on projects that were conceived by other people. I worked inside the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, working on in-house documentaries there, and then I went freelance and joined independent film teams and directed high-profile documentary series. But I longed to create a project of my own that had a closer personal connection and that would allow me to exercise more of an artistic voice, to step out of this straighter journalism that I'd been doing. And so this story, this battle between Phil and MarineLand, and also this the issue of marine mammal captivity, I'd been following it for a long time. But had not, and you know, it's one of those things where I almost feel like the universe conspired to actually give me this project to be able to exercise my voice in this way, because it's a film that has been living inside of me for many more years before I pitched it and actually made it. I had to find the courage to do it for a variety of reasons that I can talk about. But it wasn't until the issue landed in our nation's capital and we had a law that was in the process of being passed to ban the captivity of marine mammals that made me think I could actually take this story and do what I wanted with it.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's interesting because, you know, I've seen The Cove and Blackfish and Sea of Shadows and I'm thinking, is there another one that I was thinking of? And you know, it's a fascinating theme. It's a very fascinating theme. And I loved how your story is very, very personal, and it's very like, it's a very, like you mentioned, it's a messy human fable to me. And it's like, I think that describes it really well, because there's so many things when you get to know someone's ego, you know, there's so many complications. And even John Holler, who is the owner of the marine park, we can sympathize with him to some extent, to kind of, we get a worldview into not only his kindness despite his systemic abuses, which I think he just thinks are an absolute necessity, and in a way they might be, you know, and to some extent. But it's really fascinating to get a window into his personality, because he's like this, you know, Transylvanian former circus, like carnival, you know, trainer. And, you know, he's like, either if he's not gun toting, he pretends to be. So it's just, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And then we see the complexities of Phil, who's really captivating, and also his extrovertedness as the Walrus Whisperer, and to see his relationship to social media and how that influences things, because for 4 generations people have been protesting, you know, protesting this. So can you talk about your approach in terms of filmmaking, like how it seems like you spent a great deal of time shooting. Can you talk about how you you know, what your approach is in terms of how to personalize it, because we get a very creative artistic vision cinematically in terms of, you know, the imagery that you chose, and it's very personal. So can you talk about your approach?
Yes, that's a great question, because, and I'm really glad to hear that you have picked up on some of these nuances and the type of storytelling that I wanted to put out into the world. Because, I mean, in large part, because of my own personal interests, which are around this messy humanity that I observe all around me, we all do. We are all egoic creatures to some degree, but seeing this story where the egos in this story are so overdeveloped and potentially unobserved was the most fascinating thing for me to get into, also because it was going to create a film that was different than the other films that exist in this space. So when we think about animal rights films, if we can call this one that, which, you know, it is in part, but it's also in part about many other things. The Cove and Blackfish and other documentaries about veganism or other types of animal rights treat their subject very differently. And so what I wanted to do was come at this from a fresh place and look at this character and create a character-driven film that went behind the battle lines of a very famous story, something that's playing out on social media, but also pick up on the hubris that exists on all sides, and hopefully reveal that to the audience in an elegant but subtle way, because the cause is also important, you know. So it was a very difficult filmmaking process for me, and a very difficult editing process, to take over 200 hours of material. You know, I followed this story for 2 years, filmed a ton, collected a lot of archives, and had to fashion this narrative in the edit suite with the material that I had before me, in a way that could make sing these universal themes of justice and exposing wrongs, while also weaving together this underlying human fable aspect where we see flaws in everyone, and heroic, noble gestures in almost everyone as well, you know. And so the approach was deeply psychological, personal, and difficult for me, deeply challenging to exercise new muscles in this way, and also to be in the space of these very strong, obsessive characters who, on both sides of this battle, have really taken this on so personally and who exist in part just to vindicate themselves or just to put forward their view of the world in an uncompromising, sometimes not compassionate way. So it was fascinating for me to see the tension and the contradictions in the story and to try to play with that in the film and show the beauty of these characters and also the ugliness as well.
Yes, and you know, much has been said of if you don't have, you know, depression or sadness or anxiety or all the negative human emotions, right? Negative human experience to contrast happiness with, there is no happiness because we need that contrast. And so the play of dark and light and heavy and vibrant and all the dimensions of the ego actually, I think as a viewer is more rewarding than something that has more like of a one note kind of thing, that something that's more clinical or objective. Like you kind of get it I don't know how to explain it, but for me, it felt like we're witnessing it as a friend, or we're witnessing it, you know what I mean? Like a friend that is like the ear to cry, like the shoulder to cry on.
Yes.
So it had a really interesting, like a personal essay kind of tone, but there's still the journalistic aspect in it that was woven through too. So I'm curious, like, because you were in these people's lives and I feel like they were very natural and partly, you know, Phil Demers, you know, very intense, obsessive. I mean, I personally, I think it's very empathetic, you know, a person can feel very empathetic because everyone has their own sense of righteousness. And sometimes we really have to have that kind of single-minded focus and drive to create, and, you know, so, and it's really contrasted with the acquiescence, or at least, I don't know, maybe that's the wrong word, of his partner, who's also a former trainer, and her experience of it, and her, you just, you know, it's very, I don't know, I felt like it was very nuanced and very poetic, and very feminine. Like she's very yin to his yin, you know.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So, so folks should go and see it. And yeah, I mean, I just, it was really interesting to see the relationship of like members of Congress with you know, with the owner and all of that. So folks should check it out. And then I saw Sugar Coated, which you had co-produced, and it's really an incredible story about how public opinion on sugar was manipulated over the decades by the sugar industry. And I just wanted to, you know, just a couple words from you on that, like regarding the project. How was that experience? Because we're all so affected by what we eat, and we all know that we have a relationship with sugar, at least most of us do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, it's another iconic thing in our society, right? When we think about the idea of marine mammals doing shows, it's an endemic part, or it has been until recently, of our upbringing, our culture, the way we think about our childhood in terms of joy and all of that. And sugar is similar. You know, it's sort of a symbol of joy and celebration and easing of pain through comfort and all these things. And so to think of it as this little evil devil that causes all these problems in our health, and also to think about the system behind the sugar industry that does the same, that experience for me was formative working on that film. I mean, the context is that I had left my staff job at the CBC, where I was making in-house documentaries, to working freelance. And so I got connected to Michelle Hoser and Janice Dahl, who had created this project. And to work with those two formidable women to make this film is the reason I was able to have the courage to then pitch my own project and make The Walrus and the Whistleblower. Watching them in that 3-year odyssey and working closely with them on creating this narrative and exposing this abuse of power that we've seen in our society around sugar consumption, around the lobbying of the sugar industry, was such a gift. I mean, we all worked our little butts off, as I did on the Walrus film. But but it's a very different film, right? It has also this aspect of journalism. It's less character driven. We're really looking at the issue. Michelle, who edited the film, did an amazing job of weaving in beautiful archive and animated graphics to bring sugar to life in a way, so we could really connect with the topic. So I learned a lot from that project, and was able to, it was part, as with all things in life, we have these life experiences that lead us to other things and that help us grow as individuals. And that was a big stepping stone in my career, but also in my approach to storytelling. I learned a lot and was able to, go on and make this film.
And going back to the Walrus and the Whistleblower, how did you, because you said you were learning new muscles, like I would think that at some point you might feel like you were almost inundated too much in their personal lives. I would think that because you're telling an emotional, character-driven story, that you need to kind of use your heart and your emotions to navigate that space. You need to use your intuition because it's so not a clinical thing. So
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I'm just kind of wondering about that experience. What did you learn from it that you're going to take to your next work?
Ooh, I could write a book about that. I might write a book about that. I almost tear up at the thought of that question, because I am generally speaking a heart-driven person. I lead with that, and I lead with intuition. Which has a certain amount of, there's an impulsiveness there, that is mitigated by my training as a journalist. But I am in my core someone who wants to tell fantastic, surrealistic, nuanced, rich, messed up stories, because that's how I see the world. And so when I imagine myself in the kitchen of Phil and Christine, the scene that you bring up in the film where we're really seeing layers and layers of human dynamics at play, and then trying to craft that into a 3 to 4 minute scene so that people can get what I was feeling in that scene, which is a whole bunch of contradictory emotions, contradictory thoughts, various narratives colliding all into each other in the bastion of these people's homes. The skill it took and the digging into the soul it took to try to do that justice, and I'm too close to it. I don't know if I did it justice. I really hope I did, and I hope that the audience feels that way. But I worked very hard at trying to tease out those emotions and creating overall an empathetic story, so that we could feel connected to every single person we meet here, because everyone has been affected, everyone has made mistakes, everyone has hurt other people. And I think that when you ask me what I learned how to try to balance that heart with distance, with trying to observe myself as well as the person observing, and what my own reactions to that were, and trying to step out of it while being so intimately connected. I mean, this is also, remember, a story that's playing out in my hometown about a guy I knew when I was a kid, who's still friends with my brother, who I had to have very close contact with throughout the making of this film to be able to tell the story. And then getting involved and knowing all these peripheral characters and having the opinions of other people in the town on him, which is, pretty controversial. There's good, there's bad, there's ugly. When we think about the reputation of John Holler, there's good, there's bad, there's ugly. And so going home to a place, that I left 20 years ago to try to bathe in all of this, and then come out the other side, try to look at it from a distance and collect, to take the heart, but synthesize it and try to tell a clear narrative with it, was something I had never done before. So when I talk about new muscles, that's a big one. And I hope that I succeeded so that I can try to use that muscle again for a different story.
Well, I think you really succeeded, and I encourage everyone to go see The Walrus and The Whistleblower. You have a website, and folks can find out through it where it is showing and playing. And right now, there's lots of opportunities. It's at different, I think, online film festivals or different venues. There's
yeah. The easiest place right now is on iTunes and Amazon. That's where it is playing primarily right now, but it is still doing the festival circuit. And I regret not being able to physically be present for these things, but I hope that the festival run that's picking up in the spring will have some opportunities for me to travel with the film a little bit, maybe, and actually have audience engagement. But yeah, it's out there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nathalie Bibeau, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Pandora. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I think it's so marvelous. And wow. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing your further work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I just have to say, I really appreciate your kindness last week. It really marked me, and I'll always remember that, connecting to that. And your just general way of being in this interview, it meant a lot to me. It's really one of my favorite experiences.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like I learned so much from the way that you did your storytelling. It really touched me, and I had to see it again to.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, that is one thing actually that I would want to take to another film, is that I think for some viewers the nuances are lost because they may have been too subtle, because I felt them, and I can tell you feel them and you see them, and there are many other people who do, but there are many who don't. You know, there are many who really see this as a more binary, straight kind of David and Goliath story, and it's not. David is not always David, and Goliath is not always Goliath, and so it's really for a sophisticated viewer, but I appreciate that you are one of them.
You can't really, you know, be responsible for people's interpretation. It's kind of like, you know, finding out, you know, for us in America, how many people voted for Trump, you know.
Yeah.
You know, they're interpreting things that other folks are interpreting in a completely different way.
Yeah. So, exactly. Yeah. And that's art, right? That's story.
So I would just keep on your course and not worry too much about people's interpretations. And you know what? I'm a very spiritual person, and I feel like people are growing and people are waking up. And so people may return, you may be planting seeds where people return to see that film and they're like, oh, and they get something different out of it. They get some more nuances.
Yeah, I hope so.
As they change and grow, you know?
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's very true.
Yeah. And that's what's so amazing about film, is that it does really have the power to be like, to give people a new interpretation and some new tools to see things in a different way. So
yes, no, exactly. And I think it's and you see films sometimes at the wrong moment in your life and sometimes at the right moment in your life, you know, or you read a book or whatever it is. And so I feel very privileged to be in this world where this industry where we can put things out there and then they have a life of their own after that, you know. And then you don't, you know, someone said to me, a filmmaker friend said to me, you know, once you make your baby, you have to let the baby go, and the baby goes out into the world and it grows up and it does what it's going to do, and you've done your best to shepherd it and protect it and, you know, do all the things, but once it goes out into the world, it's actually not yours anymore. It belongs to everyone who participates in receiving it. And that's another thing I'm learning from making such a personal film. But yeah, it's fascinating, right?
Yeah, well, it is. And I was just reading this book till way too late this morning about written by these two guys who I think they're a couple. So it's really kind of fascinating that they wrote this thing together, and they both studied Christianity, and they have very sort of, they really look at I've read other books, similar books, but they're not really indoctrinated in the Christian doctrines, and they're looking at the real, you know, Hellenistic and Judaic and very pagan roots and influences from possibly Buddhism and all that. And it's really focused on Gnosticism and the allegorical telling and interpreting what are miracles as signs, which is the literal interpretation of Jesus's miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, there's a literalist interpretation, there's material science, and there's the literal interpretation of the Bible versus a very metaphorical interpretation, which has a lot of nuances and a lot of different a lot of different layers.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, it's really it's really a different it's a really different way to interpret these ancient gospels, and some of these books from the Gnostics are only now being, you know, and since the 70s and being revealed and interpreted in new ways. So I'm just kind of thinking that your film, that, you know, there's kind of like in writing, it's like the spiritual text of the story, which is like what you don't actually tell. It's like the, you know, the negative space, and that's the space where you just really experience.
Mm-hmm.
You experience the story and you interpret the story, and that space needs to be there, because I think what we do is we telegraph everything in our culture. You know, I mean, I think Canadian culture in some ways very different, but in some ways very similar, right? So. Yeah. What we do is in the Western world is we tend to like color in, like, you know, it's like color in the whole page, kids, color it, color.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that
for you. So
yeah, I love that.
So you're trying to tell a more personal story that allows people to not just see what's the concreteness. It's yeah. So it's kind of like Gnostic. I'm seeing it as Gnosticism.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's the cracks in between, you know. It's you know, one of my favorite notes I got after releasing the film from friends is, one of them said to me, my favorite thing about the film was what you didn't say and what you made me feel. And she didn't use the word negative space, but I imagine that's what she meant. And again, this is for an evolving person who can feel, who has the space in themselves to feel that or is receptive to that. But it's such a joy to speak to someone who does, because it's so rich, right? That's where life is. That's where the messiness is and all that. It's really, and that's where we grow, in observing that, you know?
Yes.